Give me 1 second. I'm gonna top off my beverage. Oh, seal it in my superhero mug, and I'm good.
I like the Spock mug. That's a nice touch, Eric. Oh, love that.
Welcome everybody back for another episode of Ronin's Den. I have some awesome guests with me from Tabletop Journeys. They're here to talk about Factions book that they're working on, and I'm going to go ahead, turn it over to them for introductions, and get started.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. I'm Josh from Tabletop Journeys. Thank you very much for having us on tonight. We're really excited to be talking about our upcoming Kickstarter.
And I'm
Glenn.
Oh, go for
Go
it,
ahead,
my friend.
Lewanika.
I was gonna say
I'm Glenn. Go ahead.
I'm Lee Wanika. I'm one of the co-hosts from Tabletop Journeys, and also here to talk about some cool things, what we're doing, and thank you very much for having us this evening. Our first time in the den, as it were.
It's good to have you here. Thank you very much.
And I'm Glenn, the third cohort of our small little band. And I'm also excited to be here and talk about our upcoming Kickstarter as we're looking at factions.
Yeah.
Awesome. So, what can you tell me about it? What inspired you to write it? What can we expect seeing in it?
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Let me start with the overview here. So basically, we're storytellers at heart. I mean, that's really kind of where all three of us come to the tabletop role playing game space, where we where our games sort of come from. And I'm sure we'll kind of touch on this a little bit later. But we did our first Kickstarter last year. It was a book of subclasses. It went really, really well. And we were in kind of the late stages of writing and the early stages of playtesting when the OGL kerfluffle happened. And so that had some impact in terms of our thought process on what we wanted to do going forward. We wanted to aim for something a little bit more system agnostic, a little bit more portable to multiple game worlds, multiple game systems, everything like that. And so we kind of looked through the boneyard, as it were, of stuff that we'd written but hadn't quite put finishing touches on yet, or hadn't quite rounded out yet, and came up with this idea to do a book of factions, playable factions, factions that you can kind of basically bring to either side of the DM screen, right? You can bring them out as to help inform player characters, and also use them as NPCs and heals and stuff like that too.
Yeah. Like Josh alluded to, Tabletop Journeys, while we're a podcast and we talk about lots of things involving the TTRPG game space, no small part about that is theorycraft. It's how to build a good game, how as a storyteller or game master or dungeon master, whatever you choose to refer to yourself as, to get your players to engage and really think into the game and the story you're trying to create with them. And so along those lines, we are constantly writing, not just for our podcast, but just in general. And that actually, long before the podcast, we were all doing it in some fashion. We've all had some minor credits here or there, but definitely a lot of writing, whether it be writing for our own home games, large scale LARPs back in the early aughts when we were back in college, big games that just encompass lots of people, everything. We've just always been writing, saving information. I mean, I have computers in other rooms that are just filled. They're old computers, so it doesn't take a lot to fill them, but they are filled with stories and scores of characters that I can break out for NPCs and all these things. So when we got started with the podcast and content creation, a lot of it was what are the things that we see the space is missing? What do we already have in the stable that we can bring out, dust off, and improve and bring to the table? And then, like Josh said, with everything else going on with WotC and the OGL, it was, let's not do something that is so specific that it can't be used elsewhere. A lot of people are trying to make the decision as to what to do. A lot of tables are wondering, and our thought is, we're not saying leave D&D. We're not saying go to something else specifically. What we're saying is, here are some tools, here are some techniques that will let you make the choice, and at the very least, our content will not make that decision difficult. You don't have to love our content and then get stuck somewhere. If you love our content, you can take it with you no matter where you go. So Tabletop Journeys is at the table no matter what game you're playing, no matter the size or shape or style of game you're playing. We're here for you if what you're looking for is narratively driven, good stuff that engages players.
Okay.
Right, and I think a large part of what led us to the faction book, like Wanika was saying, really came from just it was like the next logical progression for the direction we were heading, because creativity and creation begets more creativity and creation, and one project kind of feeds another, because you may not always be able to fit every idea into this one, but it really helps you as you're expanding on subclasses. As an example, your mind starts jumping into all kinds of things, but what kind of things would this person do, or would people of this class do? And a lot of the things that we've created led to the next pieces. So factions was just the next logical step.
Yeah, and we may not be able to cram everything that we want to in this book, but we sure try our damnedest to do so. I mean, this is going to be book number 4 for us. Book number 3, after stretch goals and everything, was 180 something pages. So, so I would imagine that that if this campaign goes well, that's about what you could expect this time around also. So
Okay. So what inspired creating these factions specifically? Was there a hole you were looking to fill? You said you were trying to stay up with the community and get things going for them.
So I think the overall was we had several specific ideas that came out of our last 2 books that we tabled because they were just too expansive for what we were doing. Certainly on the first book, and definitely the last one. It was this. A couple of the factions that we have here started as we should make a subclass, but then when we were looking at it and trying to develop the mechanics and that, we're like, this won't cover it. This is too expansive to be a single class. This is a group. This is a discussion about a way of life, a community, a school, something of that nature. So what we really at that point decided was, if that's the case, we need to set this aside. Because we'd had several other things that had come up in little pieces and parts that also fit that kind of narrative space. When it was, okay, so what are we going to do next? We were like, well, we're really jazzed about these other things we just got done working with and setting aside. Let's stay with that. And then it was, let's fill this in. So we kind of, me personally, I went back to my tabletop closet where I have all those old computers, where I have all my books, where I have reams and reams of wide 3-ring binders of old characters and old groups and my notes from old campaigns, and said, okay, which ones are still narratively sound, would work really well in a modern game with modern mechanics, which has a good story that just needs new polish. And so I came up with things from that space. I'll let the other 2 talk about where their specific ideas came from, but I know one of them actually just came from the activities of one of the players at my table back in the late 80s, early 90s, and the things he did with his character. And there's a whole faction that is designed on the activities of that character. Glenn just by chance happened to be the player of that character. So you're talking to the man who inspired one of these factions. Okay. So, that's how that was my process.
Yeah.
And I mean, to kind of answer the question a different way, the hole, I guess, we're trying to fill is every world builder out there, on the storyteller side, because this does fill a need for both storytellers and players. No matter how much writing they do, and no matter how much creating they do, developing your own whole world, homebrewing, regardless of the system that you're playing in, and trying to come up with everything from the NPCs and the plots and the way that the different organizations interact, and then you get into the organizations and what kind of organizations exist in your society. Having a book of, and factions aren't something that a whole lot has been done on. Like, as an example, in the 5e D&D space, Adventure League has a short document on it, but it's very small. But to be able to create a group of well-developed plug and play effectively, or as much as we can make them plug and play, ready to go mini societies that you can drag and drop into your world to give your players an additional faction to interact with. And it might even have, because you're going to take these factions and you're going to alter them some and you're going to make them your own, but it might even have different flavor than you always have, because now you've brought in kind of an extra writing team to help you with it, right? Because it came from us and you modify it. So I think that in terms of filling a need, I think there's a lot of people out there, a lot of storytellers out there, myself included, that would love a book like this that could give them, even if they don't take anything wholesale, a whole bunch of pieces that they can use and add into their own world, change as they need to, modify. And then from the player side, on that end, players who really get into backstory should be looking at things like this, because if your character is part of a world, truly part of a world, and whatever factions, organizations your storyteller has in it, those are an opportunity for your character to be tied more directly in and have their backstory work directly with parts of the overall narrative. So it fits both. But in terms of inspiration, we all have different stories on inspiration. One of my favorites is that the Hands of Providence, which is one of the ones that I'm writing, is a group of seers and fortune tellers who have or serve a collective vision of the future, and then they run around the world nudging events to make their future come to pass. And the entire inspiration behind that was in my youngest son's second D&D campaign ever. I killed him in his first major combat by accident. Well, because it's what the dice did, and there wasn't any way around it. I won't go into the whole story. But now here they are in their very first adventure of this new campaign, and he's dead. There's no way they have the money to pay for anything to bring him back to life, and I needed a way to keep the story going. And so I created an NPC named Augustus Cater, who was an Aasimar that served a diva that gave him visions of the future, and he went around resurrecting people who still had an important fate still unfulfilled. And so when they left the cave where he died in, dragging his body and all sad, Augustus was there because he had been sent to resurrect my son's character, because he was important to, the plot line of my campaign, but essentially to the world. And that was the entire inspiration behind what became, or is becoming still, because there's a lot of work still going into it, the Hands of Providence.
Yeah. I guess said it all. That's a, yeah. It all comes.
Look, guys, I was verbose.
I know, right? Yeah. It all comes, and I think the point that I really wanted to kind of to emphasize too, from what Glenn was saying, is that the entire point of the design behind these, because I'm very much like the design guy, right? I'm like, the whole point of the design is to make them plug and play, something that if you're as a storyteller, like, oh, I could use this, and so here's pages of lore about this. Here's how the faction works. Here's the structure of it. Here are some NPCs that are in the faction that I can go ahead and bring into the game. Potentially an adventure starter. So if you want to go ahead and use them and kind of cement into your campaign or whatever, we're giving you the tools to go ahead and do that. And so that's really kind of like the design focus behind it all is portability. So
okay. Do you find it difficult? Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, along those lines, we even have a stretch goal built in, that if we achieve that stretch goal, we'll actually create some of the stat blocks that are built into the primary content in a Tales of the Valiant Cobalt Press style. So it'll be compatible with that system. With our eye on the future of taking a look at all of our products and future publications from Tabletop Journeys, we'll look at taking things we've done in the past and recreating them or showing ways to bring them to other games, because largely a lot of what we've done has been portable, but we recognize the difficulty with portability sometimes is you kind of have to see the way. So we're going to with this project, we're going to provide one of those methods as we go. We'll be providing more and more
as more become available. Really,
as more become available. Like some of the games aren't out, but I'm a backer of the Cobalt Press product, so I have some insight as to how things are going to design. So by the time we're done with our Kickstarter, by the time we are getting ready to publish, we are going to be we're positioned very well from a timing standpoint to be able to put out those things. So we're hoping that folks like what we're doing and want to see that and help us hit that stretch goal. So we'll have the ability to show that and put that out there.
Very nice, very nice. What? How? So it's like I have two questions that are in my head, like right at the moment. One would be, how did you make? What steps did you take to make these as setting agnostic as possible, so they could be plug and play not only in all the different settings without interfering with current lore of those settings, and what were your design thoughts on making it system jumpable? So if I don't want to use this in 5e, but I want to use it in something, say, from what I was reading, you might be able to lift it and put it like in a sci-fi setting.
Yeah.
What was how did that all come about? What was the designs of that?
So there's two parts to that question. I think Josh will probably grab the second one. What I'll do is talk about the core basics of what we did. Our design philosophy was just do the lore, right? So we're going to have a section on the history of these guys. We're going to have these factions, rather. We're going to have a section on the traditions of these folks. But basically, this lore section, which is much more involved than just those two pieces, there are several other pieces, and we're still fine-tuning that as we go. So there might, I couldn't tell you the number of them, but there's a number of sections that are going to go into each faction that's going to be very standard. So every faction will have nearly all of those things, and a few of them will have some very specific subsections that are unique to that faction as well. But when we do that, the goal is no mechanics. So you get, here's how to do something, here's what they're about, here's how they go about things, here's the resources they have at their disposal, here's how they interact with PCs, here's how, if you're a member of them, you interact with NPCs, so on and so forth. Do you make this, depending on your system, it might be a patron kind of situation or what have you, but we're going to give the lore only. We then have a separate section that is the mechanics. So when we get to our friends and allies, I forget the exact title, Josh will probably remind me in a moment, but when we get to that section in a faction, that's where you'll see by WotC tiers, tier 1, tier 2, 3, and 4. Here is a stat block for minions of this faction. In tier 2, here are some other stat blocks for sergeants, mini bosses of this faction. Here's stat 3. Here are the local regional leaders, kind of thing. And then finally, depending on stretch goals, we may have real big NPCs that come into it as well. So, but we'll generally have the stat blocks that are set for WotC. The Tales of the Valiant stretch goal will create the exact same thing in Tales of the Valiant. So those same things, you'll see them in this other game system, kind of like a separate piece of that chapter. And finally, the idea is to talk about different time frames within that. So this organization in high fantasy times looks like this. Here's how you put them in Victorian times. Here's how you put them in a sci-fi time. Here's how you express this in this setting.
Exactly. Basically reflecting it through the lore. So kind of not just giving the faction a view of the faction in like one snapshot, right? But kind of saying, well, if this was the one that I've been working on a lot is the Ember Weavers. They're basically like the artificer kind of faction, right? They're
I was reading some of that today,
magic,
Josh.
and yeah, it's there's some really interesting stuff that I came up with at like 3:00 in the morning. So
yeah, nice work.
Yeah, but that's kind of it's looking at that faction, saying, well, okay, if this is where they started, how would they develop? What would a group of high magic, high engineering kind of for lack of a better term, nerds, how would they develop into like modern day, as a self-professed nerd, I feel like I can use that term without too much derision, but so it's like, okay, well, maybe they would become, the engineers that work for like Raytheon, or they would be the people that made stagecoaches, like, I'm throwing like a bunch of like quotes and stuff like that in there, like, quotes from like Star Wars, like the engineers that built the Death Star, they were Ember Weavers, that's what they were, kind of thing. So kind of the view of them as not just one snippet in time, or one snippet in kind of like the grand multiverse of ideas, but how would that faction move and flow through time and space, and in different kinds of settings to go ahead and be positioned. So what it allows us to do is, so a lot of where the stats are going to be largely 5e based, it allows us to go ahead and say, well, if you're playing Everyday Heroes, which is a modern day port of the 5e rules, you can use these stat blocks there and they still work. And here's the lore that kind of goes along with what these guys, or what this faction looks like in a modern day kind of capacity. So
Right. And another thing to keep in mind, that as we're putting these together, we're putting out 9 factions that are fully developed that you can drag and drop into your worlds or campaigns. True. And we're designing them to be as system agnostic as possible so that they can work in different settings and different styles of campaigns. Also true. Does that mean that every single campaign, every single faction that we have will work in every single world type? Not necessarily, and that's where the storyteller's going to come in. They're going to choose the ones that they're interested in. As an example, one of the other ones I'm writing, the Guardians of the Grave, is specifically a faction that fights and abhors the undead and those that create them. If your game world does not include any form of the undead, that one might not be the faction that you're going to choose, but there'll still be plenty of other options for you to work with from within the book. And as we're looking at each faction and writing it, what you're going to wind up with is kind of a general history and snapshot, as Josh was saying, of how it could look in different periods of time. Most of the details are probably going to come from whatever genre or time period the author feels that or envisioned it originally in. But then the next piece of that is we're challenging ourselves to say, what would this look like if you put it in a modern setting, if it was a fantasy, as an example? And then how do we write a small section that says, these are the things that you could do to modify this to make it fit into your modern setting? And that's kind of what that piece will look like. It'll be a whole lot of excerpts and advice from us on things that you can change, or specifically how the faction would be different if it was introduced into another environment.
Yeah, and Glenn just filled my head with a whole bunch of ideas. So speaking specifically of the Guardians of the Grave, if you were going to put that into a modern setting, the answer likely would be in that section. In a modern setting, this would be perfect for a game that includes some form of zombie apocalypse, whatever style of zombie apocalypse you were doing.
The Walking Dead, the movie Priest, which was a bunch of a clerical order that hunted vampires in a dystopian society. It can fit into all of those genres, but if your game doesn't have undead, it's not going to necessarily fit your...
And then to the sci-fi end, you could take it as far as the Chronicles of Riddick. They could be people whose goal is to fight the necromongers.
That would be a great way to...
And I have some amazing ideas about the necromongers. The Reavers from Firefly. Specifically with the necromongers, I actually had and built a bunch of rules for another game I played back in 3.5, specifically for the necromongers. Like, I found ways in 3.5 rules to build the necromongers there. So to have a faction that could fight against that, there's ridiculous story that I could put together for that.
Yeah, and there's all kinds of ways that we can narratively shift them from one position to another. The Hands of Providence, in one of our meetings that we were talking about, one of the ways I related it to the modern era is the show Person of Interest. If you took the Machine and its agents through Finch and John Reese and Cocoa Puffs and Fusco and everybody, and then you've got Samaritan and its evil operatives on the other side. The two programs are the omniscient powers that have the vision of the future, and then the agents are running around trying to make it happen. You can move most of these into just about anything.
Okay. Are there any plans or sections in there, do you think, that you might include, like, say, specific gear, spells, things that are signature to these factions to give them a bit of unique flavor?
Man,
Absolutely. And it's funny
yeah.
that you mention, I'll throw out a quick teaser. Um, I've been working a lot with the Guardians of the Grave. You're working with the Ember Grievers first. I'm working with the Guardians of the Grave. And as they're doing different tactics and things and going through different lore for more than just, one game system for how undead would be fought, I've been specifically coming up with some specialized equipment for them. And one of the best that my best ideas so far is kind of it's called Holy Fire. It's like a cross between holy water and alchemical fire. Little glass globules, basically napalm for the undead, and that will almost definitely be included in it. And I have a number of other specific items, and there'll be some tactics in there too for how they would approach different situations. And
That sounds hot. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
and there are stretch goals that will likely include other things that you're talking about
well, there
for
weren't though. So that's actually the funny part is that when we started building this campaign, we did not include an equipment like because we have equipment in our last 3 books, right? So it's like tons of equipment, tons of stuff in there. And this time we're like, no, not going to do the equipment thing. Like, lore, we want to stay away from rules. We're not going to do, and all of us have broken the rule already. So it's
Yeah.
not like
Well,
we're not any good at putting these limits on
yeah,
ourselves. So
yeah.
it's
Well, yeah. So
well,
there will very likely be a section that'll have those things, but in some cases there will be descriptions, and they may not necessarily be all the mechanical rules,
right.
other
right,
than the 2 groups that we're talking about. So if we have a list, here's some things. There'll be a nice descriptive paragraph on for each of those. Perhaps art, depending on what we can get for them or what have you. But then what we'll have is in the section with the WotC 5e rules, there might be rules for those things there. Then in the TOV, which is very similar, there might be those. We're not going to reprint things. That seems like a wasted page and not a good use of people's resources. But we'll find ways to make sure that if there's a difference between one system and another, between the 2 systems that are likely to appear, we'll have a way of indicating that here's how you use it for this game, here's how you use it for this other game, kind of thing.
Okay. Um, Something I'm curious about, because I come from that old time of gaming too, like the late 80s, early 90s, and you mentioned bringing stuff from there to today and
Yeah.
making it mechanically and all that sound. What was your process for that?
So for me, one of the things whenever we've done each of the 4 books we've had, whenever we've said, okay, we need something for this idea, one of the things I do is I go back into my TTRPG closet and I pull out my swath of 2nd edition Splat and 3rd edition Splat books. And I look to see, one, if the thing we're talking about has been done before, so I can see how it worked, whether it worked well, whether it worked badly. If it didn't happen before, then we design it and we make it happen. If it did happen before, I will look at it and see how does this move forward into the current system we're writing for. In the case of 5e, in some cases, some items are pretty straightforward, but in other cases, they do different things. So, for instance, there are a lot of things that had all kinds of neat special powers or acted very fast. Their mechanics were very different for 5e. So, if you're a 2nd edition player who chose weapons specifically because they're I forget the name of it, the speed factor, so you could use it more times or faster than other players, that doesn't exist here. But what you can do is build a weapon or build a piece of equipment that has traits. So one of those traits could create advantage on initiative, or it might give bonuses in some other fashion. One of the things I love to do with equipment that we build is add conditions. So if you have like a Kupesh or some kind of long curved blade, I might give it the trait that allows you to trip somebody with that as an attack. So like if you do with this weapon, you have 2 different attack modes. You have your standard attack, which is going to be, slashing at 1d6 or 1d8, whatever that might be. Or you could use this trip action and now it's a 1d4, but if you're successful in making attack, they have the target has to make a save and or be prone at the end of the attack. So, that's something that I like doing.
Quiet.
I like conditions on I like creating conditions with spells, equipment, powers and feats. I think that is much more meaningful than adding an extra D of damage or adding a specific damage type. I think conditions really bring out the flavor of an item. Because when you look at those action movies from that same time period, it was the cool things. It was that sweeping action, or even if you take it from the more modern movies, when Rick was using the big baton, two-ended bladed weapons from the Egyptian people fighting the mummies, he was foot sweeping with them and things like that. Those are cool actions that having that built into a given weapon or piece of equipment is fun. Building a grappling hook that detaches itself, it fills a narrative hole for me, because I love how people just throw grappling hooks all the time, but how do you detach that? You climb down, it's like you get to sit there for 5 minutes trying to shake the thing loose, if it dug in real
Nathan
good.
Drake does it all the time. He swings on his grappling hook, he gives it a quick shake, it lands right back on his belt. It's perfect.
Yeah, narrative holes for me. But
Yeah. Video games do that.
But at the same time, if you design a weapon who has a specific property to do that, something the Ember Weavers could do, for instance, they could design something that either has a magical property or mechanical property or both that is exclusively for that purpose. And that is something that I think would be amazing.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it all comes back to the games that I played when I started playing. Because I'm very much, I was born at the time when I started playing second edition. I know Glenn and Lou and Nico, you guys go back a generation before that. But for me, it was second edition. It was AD&D was like, and even before that, that wasn't even my first role playing game. My first role playing game was actually the original Warhammer Fantasy. With the dwarf with the orange mohawk and the tattoos and the dual axes. Like those are the things that like have shaped the stories that I continue to try to tell, are all the awesome things that happened back then. And pretty quickly after playing and getting into like tabletop role playing game is when I made my transition to LARPing. I mean, I was 5 or 6 years into tabletop games when I got into LARPing, and I got into LARPing in a heavy way and started running my own, specifically like Vampire the Masquerade games. And so like the stories that we were telling at that point are still kind of the stories that are floating around in my head that I'm trying to go ahead and pull into a new system, pull into new packaging and tell them in a different way and everything like that. So
awesome. The OGL, that whole mess from back in the day, and I wasn't going to bring it up, but you touched on it earlier.
I opened the door.
You opened the door. People get so salty with the OGL.
Sure.
What adjustments? What was the biggest impacts you saw it having on you when they initially made their announcement that they quickly walked back? And how did that affect your decisions going forward? Yeah. And then with
it was a nightmare.
Current state, how is that affecting you now?
So I would say that it wasn't very quick from the seat I was sitting in. That was 3.5 weeks of hell. Because we had made promises, we had collected money, and we were supposed to produce a thing. And
we were about a month out of delivering on our first Kickstarter book that relied on the OGL when this came out.
Yeah, and with I would say close to 90% of our principal writing was complete. We were actually just wrapping up playtesting. And so for the 3 weeks that we didn't have an answer, we were relatively paralyzed with what we were able to do because we didn't know how we were going to have to pivot. We were literally waiting for where the chips were going to fall to figure this out. And at one point, we were like, maybe we're small time and maybe we can just put it out there and no one's going to notice. Like, that was actually a conversation. And
it was.
I believe I said it more often than not, but at some point, all of us said those words or something thereof. Yeah. So that was a lengthy, drawn-out, excruciatingly painful process. I watch a lot of content to be in touch with the community, but that was a month of me doing the things that were not the fun part of this job, this platform we're blessed to have. Yeah. That was a month of nickel and diming and looking at legal things, reading contracts as best as my layman mind could handle.
And hoping that the last 8 months of work weren't just for nothing.
Yeah, checking with legal folks on trusted sources, so we'd have an idea of what we could do, determining when we were going to have to pull the trigger and engage our lawyers, because that's money. And so it's like we wanted to have a good idea of the questions we want to ask. And look, this is no shade towards lawyers, by the way, because I love them. A good friend of mine is one, and I remember saying to him once, he
Our
says,
lawyers are very good to us. Don't be.
yeah, a lot of people hate a lawyer right up until the moment they need them. I'm not that guy. I love lawyers, but at the same time, I want to have my questions buttoned up before I go to ask. I'm not taking any amount of those billable hours guessing what I'm going to ask. I've got it buttoned up, so a lot of that month was spent. What are the questions we're going to have to be specific about so they can read the document and tell us if we're legal? Those are the things that we went through for that process. So mostly because of the way it turned out, it didn't change the work much. What it did was slow us down from producing. It put about a month stop on our work. We were, our deadlines were our deadlines, and we're going to do much better with our process this time around. We've built in time for issues that are unforeseen. We didn't necessarily do that the first time, so it just didn't affect the content. It affected the timing of getting the content in the hands of our readers.
Yeah. It really changed our perspective on things too, more than anything else. Because
Yeah, it
Luna's
really
right.
did.
Like at the end of the day, it didn't really change our final product, right? Book 3 came out, and as this process was going along, and as the dust was starting to settle a little bit, we basically internally came to the conclusion that, like, you know what, this is a book that we sold in September. The campaign ended in October. We sold it last year. We were covered under the OGL at the point that we took money. We're putting this out under the OGL. And ultimately what wound up happening is by the time the book actually got sent out to backers, there were more favorable licensing terms because it had already gone Creative Commons at that point. So it's like we accepted the better terms and put it out under that. So, so that all kind of worked out in our favor. And it also made the three of us sit down and realize, and that's kind of why we're doing a system agnostic book for the most part this time around, is because we're like, we don't ever want to be in that situation again. We don't want to be in a situation where we're putting our blood, sweat, and tears into a product like this, only to go ahead and have other people take it away from us. And that was the big fear. It wasn't, there were a lot of things that were kind of crappy about the modified OGL that they were trying to put out, but the one that we really took issue with, and the one that we really took umbrage with, was those ownership criteria that said that that any content that we were putting out under the OGL didn't really belong to us, and that was a big deal to us, because we really wanted to go ahead and make sure that kind of not sovereignty, but that sort of like, like we own our stories, and we love sharing them with people who want to play them and everything like that. We don't want to just kind of willy-nilly give up the rights to them to other people who don't even need to credit us if they do it, so.
But
we're writing our intellectual property in partnership with your intellectual property and the rules that you provide, but in the end, it's still our intellectual property too. We need to have rights to our work.
One of the things that really helped it did, like we have mentioned, is it structured the things that came after more than it impacted the thing that we were working on at the time. So part of the reason why we're able to do this book in a system agnostic method, and it's likely to be a blueprint for the kinds of work we do for Kickstarter, is because so many different games we love, have different rules about how and where you can sell them. Some cannot be sold on Kickstarter. Some can only be sold in other places. So what that allows us to do is we can take a book like this, build factions for the two specific properties. We're also going to include a chapter on how to build your own factions, right? And then that's solid. That's the product. But we can also, now that we have this template, all those criteria we spoke about earlier, and for another game that might only be able to be sold on the DM's Guild, we have some opportunities to put out faction books that are lore-based only or whatever, or do their rules in that system on that platform. And then other platforms, we can put it there. But because our lore is our lore, we have some maneuverability with that product. So the factions you see are the ones we're building now. But it's a template, it's a blueprint that's not going to go away. We can build factions, say, for Dragonlance. We love Dragonlance. We have produced a Dragonlance book just a month ago, because we love Dragonlance so much. The new novel came out. We did a review on our channel, but we also produced a book on August 1st, published a book that was specific for subclasses for Dragonlance. We might be looking at factions for Dragonlance a year from now. Why? Because we love factions. We can build something for that game, and we have the freedom to do that. Because there's different platforms, but we can't put everything in this project because of those platform concerns. But so what the OGL did is opened our eyes to how can we put our love of this hobby in front of the most amount of people, and oddly, the idea is segment it. We have to put this stuff in the places where it can be put in the ways it can be put there, and that's really what the OGL told us.
Sounds almost like you're making an ecosystem of your own content that's going to be setting agnostic, where people could essentially have everything but the setting itself pre-done.
Yeah, that is our goal for content that's not setting specific. If we're writing something like Leoninka was mentioning, writing specifically for Dragonlance, if it's not for a specific setting, we want to be able to leave it open for people to use it in multiple settings or games, or whatever their favorite Saturday habit is, man.
Yep.
Well,
I mean, maybe not whatever. I think that there's some funky rules in there that we don't want to.
Okay, fair enough. Whatever's a broad
anything
term.
on the table. Anything at the table.
I was going to ask about creating your own factions, because I'm a Palladium GM. I love Palladium games, and one of the things that they put in their books...
Longtime Rifts runner right here.
Yep.
So
okay, so you're familiar. A lot of their game, a lot of their books, they'll put in like generate your own mercenary faction, or this, that, and other thing for like point buys to create your own pieces.
Superhero teams, super spy organizations, military companies, mercenary companies. Largely every single game system they have has something like that in there. So, and we've been playing Rifts, Glenn and I, since the 80s, since it first came out, or 90s when Rifts came out. We played Recon, we played so many different things. Palladium style. I have my TTRPG closet has some of Palladium books. I nearly have every Rifts book. I'm probably shy about 5 or 6 here or there, but I usually
helped
pick
by
up
me moving into an RV. I gave him all of mine.
Yeah, it did bump the street cred a little bit. I ain't gonna lie.
Oh, you already had more than me by that point, but
I do all right, and and I'm still looking for Palladium's a great system, but that was actually one of the ideas when we were building the factions that I said we really need a how-to, and I cited the fact that Palladium does that in so many of their books, and it's one of the coolest things about their books.
Yep.
I would say some of the mercenary factions are okay, like I'm thinking Rift Mercenaries specifically, but I don't think any of the mercenaries companies that are listed in that book are half as cool as the 4 or 5 that I've done for my games, used in Glenn's games, or the organization that Glenn built for his last Rift game, using that. Certainly not better. The Super Spy organization is not better than some of the Ninjas and Super Spies ones that I put together for my different groups. I have built 2 or 3 different organizations through Ninjas and Super Spies that, quite honestly, there's a little bit of them that seed through the work that we're doing, if not for this product, certainly for the next couple. So we're all about that. That's actually where those ideas originated or were inspired by.
Well, I've gone through pretty much all of my questions that I've been scratching down on this napkin, and I had beforehand when we jumped into this.
Excellent.
So can you tell us about how we could back this project, the timelines, and where we can find you guys when you're not over here in the den?
Yeah, absolutely. So,
And Josh.
Yeah. So the campaign launches on September 28th. It's going to run through October 24th. So almost a month there. For right now, the preview link is live on Kickstarter. So if you're listening, I'm not sure when the episode's going to go out, but if it's before the 28th, the preview link is live. So if you search on Kickstarter for the Traveler's Guide to Factions, you should be able to find it. Or if you look us up on any of the 17,006 social media sites that we use, you will see that link all over the place. You can find us on Twitter, you can find us on Facebook, you can find us on Blue Sky, you can find us on Instagram, you can find us on TikTok if you really want to see me dancing poorly and sharing good videos. But yeah, you'll find it out there.
You dance on TikTok?
I mean, look, Liwinika does karaoke. I bust moves. I mean, that's,
I love it.
Yeah. But yeah, if you search the Traveler's Guide to Factions, you'll find it. We've certainly been putting it out there as much as possible. So, but certainly if you just go directly to Kickstarter and search, you can be notified when the Kickstarter launches. And if it's after September 28th, same thing. Traveler's Guide to Factions is the name of the book.
Awesome. Yeah. This is going to go on live. I'm going to be posting this on the 9th. So that'll be this Saturday. Okay. So
cool. Awesome.
Fantastic.
Awesome. Make sure we'll make sure to go ahead and throw it out when we see it.
Share that. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Yep. I'll be putting it up on my YouTube, and I have Spotify, Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, and a couple other ones linked to that Spotify account as well that I can't remember off the top of my head.
Yep.
Go on. Sorry.
I was gonna say, yeah, we're starting to make use of Linktree because as we've found in recent months that it's tough to keep it all locked in. So it's in some cases it's easier just to throw out the Linktree and then you can see it all. And that's a great place to go because not only will you get our current stuff, including this Kickstarter, but it also links to some of our previous work. So our stuff that's on the DMs Guild has a link on our Linktree as well.
Sounds good. Well, unless there's anything else, I think we could give this one a wrap.
All right.
Thanks a lot for having us.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, we appreciate it. This is, like I said, our first time in the den. This is a great experience. Thank you so very much. We really look forward to hearing from your viewers and listeners. And by all means, folks, shoot us questions. Shoot Ronin some questions to bring to us so that we can get those answered for you.
Awesome. If you guys could send me over how people can get a hold of you, either email addresses, whatnot, I'll add that in with the video and have that there so people can get a hold of you with their questions. I'll also post a link to the Kickstarter for them as well.
Yep. I just sent you the link to the Kickstarter. I'll send you our Linktree now.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Great. You got it.
And thanks everybody for stopping by, listening to Ronin's Den, and we will catch you next time.